Thank you all for coming to pay your respects to my father. The last few days have been absolutely difficult. However, I'm proud to stand before you today to honor the life of my dad. My name is Will Williamson. As you can guess, I was named after my father, who was named after his father, who was named after his father. In fact, my son shares our same name. Let me start by saying that my dad would have loved seeing and speaking with all of you, and I truly believe that he is here now watching me and watching you. Of course, if you remember him, his arms were always crossed and he had a grin that only he had. He definitely is interested in what I have to say. All right? And needless to say, I know my dad would not have wanted you to be sad for his passing, for he is still very much with us. He is just finished with his body. For there is no death, only a transition from God's other door, through God's other door. How do we know this? How do we know for certain that this is true? Because written in Scripture, the Bible tells us this many times over. In Kings, found in the Old Testament, we find the story of the prophet Elijah and the widow and her son. If you recall, Elijah was told by God to go to Zarephath, where he commanded a widow to feed Elijah. When Elijah gets there, he asks for food. The widow says, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, where we may eat it and die." If you remember at the time, there was a big drought, okay, for a long time there. And Elijah said to her, "Do not fear. Go and do as you have said. But first, make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward, make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth." And she went and did as Elijah had said. And as she and he and her household ate for many days, the jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son?" And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber, where he lodged, and laid him on the bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. And the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." As we can see, Elijah believed in the Lord, and through Lord was able to bring this woman's son back from the dead. Another example of man overcoming death comes from John in the New Testament. It is the story of Lazarus. Jesus had just received news that his friend Lazarus from Bethany was sick and had died. Jesus told his disciples that he would go and wake him up. His disciples were afraid. "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." So Jesus, with his disciples following him, traveled to Bethany. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here..." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, I know, he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Lazarus was alive. And of course, we have the ultimate example of man overcoming death in Jesus himself. On April 3rd, AD 33, Jesus was sentenced to death. He was stripped and mocked by the Roman soldiers. He was given a purple robe and a crown of thorns to wear upon his head. He was forced to carry the very object that he was to be crucified on, all the way to Golgotha. While carrying the cross, he is punched, kicked, whipped, and bodily broken several times over. Then, when he reaches Mount Calvary, Jesus is nailed to the cross, which is then placed upright. He cries out, after many hours of suffering on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Then Jesus goes on to die and rise again on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. So what can we take from this story? Yes, Jesus did overcome death, but there is more to this. This story is one we can all relate to many times over, that Jesus had his doubts and appeared to momentarily lose hope while suffering on the cross that day. But Jesus had faith in the Father, the Lord. Remember, the real test for Jesus was not having to endure being brutalized and nailed to the cross to be crucified. No, the real test of faith came in the Garden of Gethsemane when he realized that he had met every test God had given him and yet must know the sting of death. His faith and belief in the Lord allowed him to continue on this path, even though he could see what was going to happen to him, even though he could see that he was going to have to suffer. But he does continue on his path because of his faith in the Lord and to show man that there is no death for those who believe in him. For in man's experience here on earth, there comes those periods of doubt and of the loss of hope. When this happens, there should be the reminder of the Easter morning as to what it meant and does mean in the hearts and minds of those who have and do put their trust in Jesus the Christ. Though he bowed under the burden of the cross, though his blood was shed, though he entered into the tomb, through that power, that ability, that love as manifested in himself among the fellow men, he broke the bonds of death, proclaiming in that act that there is no death when the individual, the soul, has put his trust in him. Then we say, when our loved ones, our heart's desires are taken from us, in what are we to believe? This, we find, is only answered in that which has been given as his promise, that God hath not willed that any soul should perish, but hath with every temptation, every trial, every disappointment, made a way of escape, or for correcting the same. It is not a way of justification only, as by faith, by a way to know, to realize that in these disappointments, separations, there comes the assurance that he cares. For to be absent from the body is to be present with our God, the Lord. For as we do unto the least of our brethren, our associates, our acquaintances, day by day, we also do unto our Maker. So, we must treat each other with love and respect. My dad was a great example of this. He treated everyone he met like he had known them forever, and that they were special to him. There were times when life was very hard for him, but you would never know it. Because I truly believe he found love, happiness, and contentment with being around others and making them laugh, or just by helping them. I remember coming home and finding people who I would never associate with at his table, like people who were, drug addicts, people suffering, people doing bad things, making bad choices. However, in the presence of my father, they were family, and he treated them so. And in return, so did they. I never saw so much love for strangers than when I saw from my dad. And he did this because he was a loving person who believed in the word of the Lord, and that Jesus was the example for all of mankind to follow. All right, so now I'm going to go over a little bit about his life. Anyone who knows my dad, William C. Williamson, or as many of you knew him as Bill, knows that he absolutely loved baseball. He loved the Red Sox and he loved the Pirates. So I will recount some of the events of his life like it was a baseball game, because life is in many aspects a ball game, with its ups and downs, great plays, and missed opportunities. So, in the top of the first inning, we have my grandfather, Will Williamson, and my grandmother, Joyce Knapp, meeting at a gas station in Mercer for the first time. My grandfather had just returned home from the end of World War II when he saw a young man giving this pretty girl working the cash register a hard time. He was saying, "All I got is this $100 bill." Well, the young lady did not have enough cash in the register to break the bill, which left our young shyster grinning from ear to ear. He figured he was going to get out of there without having to pay. My grandfather, who was next in line, interrupted the smiling young shyster and said, "I can break that bill for you, ma'am." The shyster, shocked and disappointed, had his change and his exit. The young lady graciously thanked my grandfather, who did not miss out on the opportunity to ask her on a date. And a week later, he asked her to marry her. So then shortly after, my dad was born in 1946. He was the oldest of 5 boys. Soon after, his brothers Rick, Jeff, Doug, and Steve joined the team. Collectively, they were called the Williamson Boys, and everybody in Grove City knew them. But let's go back to my dad and his early childhood, as we were only in the second inning. The one story I vividly remember actually comes from a black and white picture taken at their home in Blacktown. Dad is somewhere around 2 or 3 years old and has no clothes on except for a giant cloth diaper, which was just hanging off of him. We were looking at these old pictures together when he noticed the black and white picture. He started laughing nervously and shaking his head. I asked him, "Tell me about this picture, Dad." He said, "It's not the picture, but the house behind him in the image." He said one day at an early age, he started to pick up drawing and painting. He really enjoyed it. Then he discovered that the inside wall of their Blacktown home would be his canvas. He was painting away like Da Vinci when his mother seized him by the arm and dragged him out of the house, with him hollering. She then dragged him through the yard and put him under the well faucet and pumped cold water all over his head and body while yelling at him. I was laughing and said, "Dad, she must have been really mad at you for drawing on the walls." He said, "Yep, that and the fact that I was grabbing the poop out of my diaper to paint with." I think I laughed till I cried. I mean, it's still funny to me now. What a memory. This is something I will never forget. So I believe this was the first time in life Dad was thrown a curveball by a pitcher named Mom. Another story I vividly remember is the father and son game he played with his dad when he was in Little League. His dad came over on a boat from Scotland in 1924, I believe. And as you know, the Scots don't play baseball. It was actually his mom who had taught him how to play. He said his dad, a Scot, hit 2 home runs during the only time he ever played or swung a bat in a game. He said Grandpa said it was simple. See the ball, hit the ball. My dad was so proud of him, for good reason. It's not easy hitting a baseball, even if you practice a lot. My dad was a great ball player. I can remember pitching to him as a kid and watching him hit home runs from both sides of the plate. And that's after years of being in the Army and away. He would often brag about being the first pick in the draft for the Grove City Little League and stealing 120 bases in one season, including home a ton of times. I remember being in awe of all his trophies, which sat on our fireplace in Mercer. All right, so now we are in the third inning of the game. We find him at Grove City High School. He likes school. He enjoys reading. He is madly into baseball, never misses a Pirates game, often listening on the radio in his dad's car. His favorite players are Dick Grote, Bill Mazeroski, and of course Mickey Mantle. My favorite story involving his high school years centers around a nemesis teacher named Mr. Zinkum. You guys familiar? Yeah? Mr. Zinkum was a 6'4" athletic bald gym teacher who, in my dad's words, would never smile but instead give whacks. He had a paddle with holes drilled in to avoid wind resistance. Well, one day after gym class, my dad and his friend got into a fist fight with some hoods. He said Zinkum, that's what he called him, Zinkum, ran into the locker room and caught them all fighting. He started snatching people up to administer justice. My dad watched how he paddled the other boys in front of him. He said his friend was twice his size and was getting whacked so hard that he started to cry. When my dad saw how hard Zinkum was swinging that paddle, he took off and ran out of the office and out of the gym. My dad figured he would get called back down to Zinkum's office, but the call over the intercom never came. A couple of days passed, and Dad thought he was in the clear. Zinkum must have forgotten all about him. However, after gym class one day, Zinkum walks up to my dad in the locker room and says, "After you get dressed, stop in my office." So Dad got dressed and stopped in his office. Zinkum was leaning back in the chair behind the desk. Zinkum then says to Dad, "Don't I owe you something?" My dad says, "Yes, Mr. Zinkum." And Mr. Zinkum says, "Why did you take off?" And my dad says, "Mr. Zinkum, because if you whacked me the same way you whacked Kenny, who was twice my size, you would have killed me." Zinkum sits up and leans forward and starts laughing extremely hard. He smacks the desk with his fist, and he says, "Get out of here, Willie." And my dad says, "Yes, Mr. Zinkum," and beat feet. Those are my dad's words, right? So my dad was able to get out of that situation in that inning unscathed. So that closes out the third and fourth innings. So now we're on to the middle innings. Dad graduated from Grove City High School in '64 and enrolled at Edinboro University to become a history teacher. While at Edinboro, his mother had passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease. He loved his mother and often talked about seeing her again. In fact, we recently talked about his mother and how she was able to manage a house full of wild Williamson boys. Soon after, my dad graduated from Edinboro in 1968. The Vietnam War was going on, and my dad and my uncle enlisted in the U.S. Army. My dad was stationed at Fort Lee, and his brother, my Uncle Jeff, was sent to Vietnam. So my dad was in the Army from '68 to '71, and then he rejoins the Army in 1976. In 1978, my dad is stationed in Berlin, Germany, and as you remember from some of those pictures, you can see the patch, it's the Berlin Brigade, okay? So they're responsible for keeping West Berlin free and out of the hands of the Communist Soviet Union. While in Berlin, he met my mom, Jae Kyung Lee, who was a nurse in a Berlin hospital. Many of you knew her as Sally. I was born shortly after in '79. We all lived there as a little family in an apartment about 2 blocks away from the Berlin Wall. In 1981, my sister Susan was born. Our family was getting bigger. Then my dad got orders for the base and state where he had told them he had the least interest in going, Fort Ord, California. So while stationed at Fort Ord, my dad and mom bought a home in Seaside. Our family still remembers that home fondly because John, Bob, and Philip were born while we lived there. Our family was now huge and we loved it. We went everywhere with Dad. He owned several apartment complexes in the town and would go to work on them after he got off work from the Army. He even bought a yellow utility truck from the city to put all his tools and supplies in. Whenever he used it, us and the neighborhood kids would ride in the back. We truly were having the time of our lives. Then when 1986 came, he got out of the Army and sold all of his properties in California and moved back to Pennsylvania to raise his now large family and be closer to his father and his brothers. When we moved to Pennsylvania, Dad drove by a house in Mercer that he spent a ton of time at as a kid and was owned by his Aunt May, and it happened to be for sale. So we went for a showing, and he was amazed that it had the same furniture in it from when his Aunt May owned it. She had then sold the house to the family in the late 50s and 60s, so he immediately buys the house and we move in. It had 3 floors, a library, and a ton of land to play on. Shortly after, his 6th child, Colette Joyce, was born. Her middle name was from his mother. So we now had 6 kids, a huge house, and tons of land to play on, and his dad and brothers nearby. He had also joined the Grove City National Guard, which his brother Doug was commander and the rest of his brother's soldiers in. Life was grand, and we all enjoyed it. The San Francisco Giant games he used to watch in California were now replaced with his childhood favorite, the Pittsburgh Pirates. In the yard, he taught my brothers and I how to play catch in baseball. Shortly after learning the basics, he took us to Brandy Springs Park every day to practice on one of their baseball fields. He loved it, and so did we. In the fall, we played soccer, which he knew a ton about. While in Berlin, in the Army, he had made a German professional soccer club after tryout. He coached us in every sport. Every week, he took us kids to the library to check out books and practice. In the practice, he would continue until we all moved away. So this is something that he loved, was just being around us. So now for the 7th inning. 1992, we moved to Sharon. Dad continues to coach us in sports, and we continue to excel. We also continue to excel in academics, which was a source of pride for both of my parents. Then life threw us a curveball. On May 9th, 1993, Mother's Day, my family goes out for a swim at a local beach called 846. My mother would swim out to this island and back. It was probably at least 2 miles to get to the island, and she had done this a ton of times. She had made it to the island, but not back. My dad saw her floating face down and swam out to get her. He almost drowned himself pulling her to shore. He had to be rescued by 2 college kids who saw what was happening. Once up on the beach, he did not find a pulse. Dad started CPR and continued until he got a pulse. By that time, an ambulance had arrived and took my mom to the hospital. I did not go with him to the beach that day, but I could see on my dad's face when he got back with my brothers and sisters that something horrible had happened. My mother had drowned and was now in a coma. For 2 weeks, my dad kept our hopes up and snuck me and my sister into St. Elizabeth's Hospital to see my mom. She was hooked up to all these machines that kept her alive. It was the first time and only time I ever heard my dad cry. My mom died shortly after. That summer, Dad kept us busy by playing sports, going camping, and getting us whatever we needed. He kept us moving. It was hard, and we were young, but my dad got us through it. Then 3 years later, his father died from cancer. He really missed him, and it showed. Fast forward a couple years, and my brothers and I are all heavily recruited to play college baseball at all levels. He drove us around to several colleges and tryouts and spent hours talking on the phone to coaches. He was working 2 jobs and sleeping very little. However, he still got us what we needed and never bought anything nice for himself. Life was tough, but he was tougher. All the money he made went to the needs of the family. He was always thinking of the next step for each of us. Personally, and when he had free time, he had interest in medicine and began to compile these large folders with printed pages on natural cures for disease. It inspired 3 of my siblings, Susan, John, and Phil, to go to medical school out in Arizona, where they graduated and opened up their own medical practice called the W Clinic. And he was so proud. I graduated from Slippery Rock University around the same time and got an offer to teach history in a place called Chesapeake, located in Virginia. I turned down the job offer 3 times. But when my dad told me where it was on an actual map, I called them back and I took the job. I wanted to be by the beach. All right? So today, I'm still a teacher in Chesapeake. So on to the 8th inning. Around this time, my siblings left for Arizona and I to Virginia. My dad met a wonderful woman named Edna who lived in the Philippines. My dad was smitten with her and soon they were married. We now had 2 new additions to our family as Edna had a funny, smart 12-year-old named Madison. Edna had taken care of my dad and had been his companion now for 14 years. Her daughter was his daughter, and he treated her so. They did everything together. Cross-country trips, European trips, several trips to the Philippines, not to mention daily trips to Bob Evans, singing karaoke, and countless other things. They were inseparable, and we are so thankful for you, Edna. My dad loved you, and we love you too. Because before this, he had spent so many years alone. And we were worried when we were leaving, what would happen to Dad. So you gave him a new life, and we loved watching this. He loved you. All right, on to the bottom of the 9th inning. The W Clinic is now considered the second best medical practice in the state of Arizona. My brother Bob works as a security analyst for a major bank. Colette has a beautiful singing voice just like Dad, and I followed in his footsteps as a soldier in the Army and a history teacher. None of us would be where we are today without all the sacrifices Dad made for us. Madison just had a beautiful little girl named Juliana, who my dad absolutely adores, and there are tons of pictures and videos to prove it. Dad has 10 beautiful grandchildren, with one who has his exact name. They all adore him and call him Grandpa. They love to hear him sing, and they love roughhousing with him. Well, the game is tied. Bases are loaded. 2 outs. 3-2 count. Here comes the pitch. It's a fastball on the inside corner of the plate. Dad sees the pitch and turns on it. The bat crushes the ball and it sails deep into left. The left fielder, just back, looks up and watches it soar over the wall and into the night. The crowd goes wild as Dad circles the bases. Edna, his sons and daughters, his 3 brothers, nieces and nephews wait at home plate to congratulate him for hitting a walk-off grand slam. Great job, Dad. We pat him on the head and exchange high fives and hugs. He is grinning and laughing like always. All right, we watch as he steps off the field and into the dugout and heads down the tunnel to go home. The cheers begin to fade as he walks through the dark tunnel. He looks behind him and he doesn't see us anymore. He keeps walking though. He hears a faint clapping in front of him and coming from the end of the tunnel. The light gets brighter and the claps and cheers are louder the closer he gets. He hurries his pace. As he crosses into the other end of the tunnel, we can hear him one last time chuckle and laugh before he disappears into a flash of white light. As he passes out of the tunnel and into the light, his brother Rick punches him in his arm and says, "You sure took your time rounding those bases, Bill. We got some muskrat traps to check." His father's next, shakes his hand hard and hugs him on the shoulder and gives him the keys of the car. "You made it just in time. The Pirates are about to play the Yankees. It's on KDKA radio." He is next hugged by his mother. She says, "When you're done with them boys, do you want to play catch? But before that, someone else is waiting for you." My dad looks up and sees my mom. She is smiling. She takes his hand. "Welcome home, Bill," she says. Is there anyone else who would like to come up and say a couple words or speak about their experiences with my dad? All right, Jason, come on up.
Hey, I remembered over a year ago I went to Arizona with my Uncle Bill, and I had a real good time with him. And I've always enjoyed him. I enjoyed his company. He was such a great guy, and he was always fun to be around with. He enjoyed all of us. It's one day I'm going to see him and meet him again, and we will all miss him.
Is there anyone else who would like to come up and say any words? All right, I guess we will proceed then to the cemetery at Oakwood. All right, thank you.